Hello. in my hand so I can write notes on it. Wait a minute, how did I lose my? Okay. Let me start my minutes. Constitutional DMS, living shorelines. There it is, agenda. File, save as. Minutes. Minutes. Here we are. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, but you sent me an email and I made the change. So, but let's bring it up. Because you already sent it to me, I already made it, but it's okay to say what you were gonna say and I'll say, okay, yes, yes, I'll do that. Because I already did it.
Yes.
Oh, here she is, we got her.
Perfect.
Yay! It's okay, take a breath, Valerie.
It's not even 3 yet.
Yeah, you're good. Oh, I had the mic on, sorry. So, Brian, are you all queued up? So, welcome everybody. I'll call to the meeting to order at 3:01 PM. Our first order of business, let me turn off my phone. Everyone should do the same so it doesn't go up. But our first order of business is public input. So is there any public input for our August Sea Level Rise Committee meeting? I'll wait a respectful few more seconds. In case all of a sudden somebody puts their hand up, says something. Okay. I'll call is that enough time to call public input to close? I think nobody's going to say anything. Okay. Our second item is approval of the minutes from July 24th. And I know Sosha had a comment on that.
Item 5.
Yes.
I would like to have included the fact that I asked Dr. Grilly for the possibility of having the sand engine being reflected in a simulation software. And the sand engine is something that the Dutch government has implemented in Holland. It is a way by which sand is deposited in certain strategic places so that the currents can carry the sand to the beaches, replenish them, and then that in turn replenishes the dunes. So it would be nice to see if the simulation software could see if that is a possibility for Corneck Road. That's a long answer.
Yeah, but no, I understand what you're
Yeah.
asking, and I've already put a sentence into the minutes that reflects your request, but I wanted to make sure you had a chance to
Thank
say
you.
something about it.
Thank you.
So I've already made that, I've added a sentence about the sand engines. Is there any other change? I'll send it to you, Laurel. Is there any other change? Are there any other changes to the minutes? So can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
That's Sosha. Have a second? That's Nigel. And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. The third item on our agenda is the update on the town council. And the only thing I have for that is that this letter was sent to the town council about changing the title and mission of this committee. For those of you who are new to this idea, we are the Block Island Sea Level Rise Committee, but we feel like we're doing a lot more than just sea level rise. So we're proposing to the town that they give us a new title, which is the Coastal Resilience Committee, and that we have a broader mission that encompasses more than just sea level rise, because the truth is we're dealing with a lot of different things, not just sea level rise. I'm pretty good at spinning stuff to sea level rise, but there's like the freshwater flooding, for example, we can't look at catastrophic storm surges without including the freshwater component. And in fact, if you look at Bridgegate Square, a lot of that's freshwater flooding right now. And so anyway, so we've made this proposal to the town council and it will be considered at their August, what meeting? Do you remember? 12? What's the town council meeting? I can't remember. Yeah, when's the next town council meeting?
The 19th?
Okay, so they told me that would be on the next agenda of the next town council meeting. And we'll make sure, Laurel and I will make sure that it's on there. Is there anything else about or from the town council? Okay, Allison is online. Thank you so much, Allison. Is there anything that you would like to add? And we only met like a week and it was 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago. But is there anything that's changed in Grantland or anything else that is an update from you? Go ahead, Allison.
I would say the only update would be the RFQ that had been posted for the Corneck Road dune restoration project. The town received, the deadline was August 2nd on Friday, and the town received 3 proposals or qualifications from firms. So the 3 firms were Fuss and O'Neill, VHB, and GZA. So that's great news that we have 3 qualified firms to review proposals from. So the town will be engaging in that in this week and the following week.
That's good.
And Allison, I believe we are advisory. This committee is advisory. And of course, you know, we aren't the ones that manage the grants and do all the hard work that you guys do behind the scenes. But if there's a way that we can assist, especially on technical details or you know, answering some of those questions, please let us know.
Yes, sure.
Let me know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll follow up with you, Judy, but yeah, I'd like
Yes.
you to look at the proposals that the town received to,
I really
yeah,
appreciate that.
we'll have several reviewers, so scoring them. So I'll be in touch for your input and your review.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else from you, Allison?
Nope.
Okay, the Black Island Coastal Resiliency Coordinator, Glennie LeBaron.
That's me. Hello, everyone. So I've got my usual laundry list of updates for you all. So just following up, someone mentioned at our last meeting, was asking some questions about the CRS, the status of CRS in town of New Shoreham. So that's FEMA's part of their flood planning is that communities can enroll in the community ranking system, which essentially means that you hit certain criteria, you get a certain ranking status, and then that allows homeowners to get discounts on insurance and other components of the program. So currently the town of New Shoreham, as of 2018, 2019, is a level 8. You start at a level 10 just for enrolling. So it is towards like in the earlier stages. So there are 19 different elements that you get ranked or scored on. So thank you for, I don't even remember who brought it up, but it's a great point. And it's definitely part of, as I go through the ordinance review, I will also be reviewing the community ranking system and seeing what other components maybe we can do to bump ourselves up a level or 2.
Yeah, I think this is Judy. I think I'm the one who raised it, but Allison's
Yeah.
the one who did all the hard work
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
for
It's a lot of-
engaging us
it's a lot
in the
of work, yeah.
community rating system.
Mhm.
So or
Which is
ranking
awesome.
system.
Yeah. Oh, I think Allison has a comment.
Yes, Allison.
Yeah, I'm happy to work with Glennie on that. I mean, to give you all the background information,
That'd be great.
understanding the CRS process. So we just went through our 5-year cycle verification. That was the first, we do an annual recertification since we entered the program in 2018. And so we just had our 5-year cycle verification. It's a bit of a tedious process and lots of documentation that needs to be collected and provided. And we continued to, we were able to maintain that class 8 status, which is great. I mean, something, you know, I would also mention the hazard mitigation plan update. We're going to be including the flood management plan into it, like a combined plan. And so the town will receive some extra points there for, it won't be, your cycle verification is another 5 years, but there are probably some opportunities to increase, your credits and possibly, you know, go up a class, maybe 1, you know, to 7. You just got to look at the other communities that are in the plan, in CRS in the state, and see what levels they are at as well. It's challenging to get much further up, I would say, and you also need to balance like the cost and benefit of that. You know, there is a cost to the town to conduct additional activities, and it's a small savings in, you know, flood insurance to a small number of property owners. So just something to think about. And we have been doing that work in the last, you know, the cycle verification to see where extra points we could, what things we're already doing that we can get points for, and what are those other activities that we could do some additional work as a community to achieve that. But it's also just something to keep in mind when you're looking at some of those activities. So again, I'm happy to explain in further detail, whoever's working on this, what our experience has been thus far and our, you know, decision making in choosing which activities to receive credit under.
So the reason why this is important, the community rating, is it rating system or ranking?
Ratings.
Rating, community rating system is that it actually, when Allison's talking about class 8 or class 7, if you get a lower class number, it actually affects the insurance rates that the town is paying for its municipal buildings, but it also affects your insurance rates. If your insurance company, you know, if it knows that we're engaged in the community rating system, it might affect it. You might be able to get some credits, and it's worth it to find out what class your insurance considers you, because what they do with an island like Block Island is they give us all one rating, even though some properties are way more vulnerable to flooding than others, but that's too complicated for the insurance industry. And so they give us all one rating as a community. And so if we went from 8 to 7, that might lower all of our insurance rates. So that's why this is important. And Allison, I'm hoping that our involvement with Brown University and the law program at Roger Williams, looking at legal challenges or legal constraints to coastal resilience. I'm hoping that those kinds of partnerships, the URI study of movement of sand off of Crescent Beach, I'm hoping all of these things will give us credits.
Well,
and hopefully.
There's credits for public outreach type activities. That's why. And again, we're talking about flood insurance premiums,
Right.
not everyone it's only those that carry flood insurance properties, right? So,
Yes. I should have been specific about
yeah,
that.
I didn't mean
It's
to,
about
yeah,
flood
it's not for
insurance,
all residents, you know, on the island, but, yeah, it's very specific what types of activities. The town does receive a substantial portion of the credit is due to the percentage of open space within the floodplain. So that, you know, I calculate using the GIS, and the town, that's where a bulk of the credit is, the town receives. So conserved open space.
Yeah, I thought there was also a thing about partnerships in there, but
I'm not aware of that.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so good news for us where we have been participating. Thank you, Allison. And we're
Perfect.
just, that's something that we're just gonna pay
Yeah,
attention
just
to.
wanted to make sure, people knew that was happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect.
So the other things I have going on, since I know everyone's here to hear Brian soon. So I just wanted to make aware to mostly to the Sea Level Rise Committee and, others, that there's NOAA and SNEP are putting on a Advancing Coastal Resilience Through Nature-Based Solutions webinar that's free. And it's basically about, it's practitioner focused and about different, how to work with different groups and organizations that are actually implementing the great infrastructure. So it's a cool opportunity. I'll email it to the group.
When is it?
It's August 22nd, 3 to 4:30. So it's in a few weeks, and it's a webinar, so on the internet.
Oh, cool.
And then the other last two updates I wanted to give was just, Judy and I have been working with Dylan Chase and a class at Brown University there's a community engagement project where students are going to work primarily with Dylan to look at a couple different resiliency based topics. And I think it's gonna be a really cool project. They're gonna have some outputs or they're gonna have a presentation for us by the end of the semester. Some of the topics are pretty neat. It includes looking at the state landfill, gray water usage, biosolid applications, grease prevention, and then some community outreach about wastewater. I think this will be, I want to let you know that ball is also continuing to roll. And then also we have the Roger Williams University. I think last time we mentioned, I don't know if we updated folks on this. Last time Brianna Jordan from Roger Williams University met with us and talked to us a little bit about a program in which a law student and a staff attorney will work together on kind of a policy project. And she and Julia, what's Julia's last name? Wyman, thank you. She and Julia Wyman actually decided to move forward and offer us a law fellow pro bono for this fall, which is super exciting. And so we're really excited to be working on that partnership. We're specifically going to focus on how municipal and state actors interact with each other for green infrastructure solutions. So specifically, whose role is it to regulate that? Whose role is it to put forward policy? How do actors work together in that space? And that will be we'll continue to mold that project into something.
Glennie, will that information be presented?
Yes, so I believe, they are working on a scope, which is basically a description of the project. And we can share that with the committee.
Yeah, so, yeah, we totally can share the scope of and then the law students have a group of these to choose from. And we're hoping that whatever we write is, seductive enough to get them to consider working with us on Block Island. Just having it as a Block Island project, I think makes it a little bit attractive. And so Glennie and I are working with Brianna to make it as attractive as possible so that we get a student this fall. But if we don't, we can get one in the spring. I mean, it's a living opportunity is the way we're looking at it.
And last time you mentioned this, you said, give us questions. Remember?
Yeah.
So can you remind us when the time comes when we should be sending in questions?
So I believe the questions last time, was that for the CRMC folks?
No.
Oh, it was specifically okay.
Yes, you said.
Yeah, I mean,
All right,
that's
now's the
true.
time.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say now,
Mhm.
and Glennie
Yeah.
and I can meet with you because I want to hear them too.
Mhm.
Whatever, because
Well, I
I'm so
haven't-
shy. So
I
appreciate what you say.
I haven't thought of the questions
Yes,
yet,
I know.
but I need to know the parameters. In other words, a question about what? Do
Well,
you know what I mean?
Mm.
So if you remind us, then I can start thinking.
so they're going to be working on the relationship, for example, between CRMC and municipalities or DEM and municipalities, and how is it working and how isn't it working? That's the kind of thing that that's what she said. That's what she's
she
talking
said.
about. Yeah, that's a
That's what she
different,
said.
that's a different way of saying what Glennie said. Yeah. And so,
Okay.
yes, Mary.
I'm just laughing. Yes, I remember this conversation. Go ahead.
Okay, but, Sosha, you have such a different viewpoint on this stuff that we really value it. And, so maybe it would be really worth it to have a conversation with you, just even if it was virtual, just to, if you don't have to be here, we can do it on
Yep.
the online and just like talk through
Mhm.
the scope of work.
Mhm.
Just because you always have such interesting insights.
Thank you.
Anyway, yeah.
Perfect. Make a note to follow up with you. Great. And then my final update for the crowd is that, again, last meeting, I brought up that I had met with folks at CRMC. I don't know if I had at that point, or I was about to. And so we have a good contact at CRMC who does a policy analyst. Her name is Leah Feldman. And we have invited her and the person who specifically looks at permits on Block Island. They're excited to come out and have a to join us for a sea level rise meeting.
Good.
We're hoping, and then you can ask them all your questions. We are hoping to have them come out either September or October based on their schedule. And I think we'll make some specific invitations to other folks like the Conservation Commission and Jen
For sure.
Brady and other folks in the town who are also have working relationships with CRMC. I know that they have a lot of information and we have a lot of questions, so I think it could be a good meeting.
By the way, thank you so much for, managing these partnerships. We wanted to attract people to us, but these partnerships take management. It takes time and you got to work with people and it's, Glennie has been doing a really great job of building these relationships and maintaining them by staying in touch with people and following through. So I really appreciate it.
If
Thank
I
you.
can just follow up on that for a
Yes.
minute, since Glennie won't be with us forever, I think it would behoove our committee to have a little summary of what you did for us because it was very significant. And I think it will help inform us about future guidance.
Yes. Kim and I keep track, so I keep track of all my goals and what I accomplished so that, if you ever need to summarize or train somebody else, that there is a written record already in motion for that.
Good, good.
We'll just hang on to you as long as we can.
Yeah.
Anything else?
That's all
from
from
you?
me.
Is there anything from the audience for Glennie, the Coastal Resilience Coordinator? Awesome. So I'm gonna, the item number 4 is a letter to the town council regarding expenditure for recurring communication costs for the water level monitoring in Old Harbor. I'm gonna table that. I'm just not prepared. I don't have the numbers and I thought I might, but I don't. And so I'm going to table that for our next meeting and Nigel and I will continue to get in touch with Nerakus. For those in the audience who weren't with us last time, the Northeast Regional Association of Coastal Ocean Observing Systems, Nerakus, it has offered to purchase for the town of New Shoreham an optical water sensor, so water level sensor. So this, instead of what we have now, which is something in the water that measures the weight of the water above it to tell us how much water there is. This is an optical sensor that literally looks down at the surface and it averages over a certain number of, a certain period so that it's flashing and waves and stuff are averaged out. But anyway, it's a very simple version of it. And, but anyway, so we've been working with Interstate Navigation. We're going to put it on the dock out here by Interstate in Old Harbor. And we're very excited about that. But there are communication costs because we're going to use cellular to communicate the data. What the good news about that is all of that data goes to Nerakus through satellites or whatever in near real time. So that anybody can have anybody can have access to that data in near real time. So good for planning. When we met with Billy McComb and who else? Anyway, but anyway, when we met with Interstate, they were excited to know that they were going to have access to this data so that would help them with their planning for the docks at Galilee and here. By the way, there's another optical sensor going in Galilee and Nerakus is paying for that as well. And that's for Brown University is the group that has requested the for the sensor for Galilee. So that's just a little background. So I'm going to table that issue, close that discussion unless anyone has any questions. No good. So let's get to the real stuff. Today we have with us Dr. Brian Oakley from Eastern Connecticut State University. Brian has been working on Rhode Island geology for, I would say, his whole career, and Block Island for most of that too. Nigel and I and Jules, who's in the audience, is Kathy here? There she is, yeah, and George. A lot of us on the committee and our partners have been profiling beaches on Block Island for several years. So it's really several. How many has it been? Yeah, more than a decade. Yeah, we started right after hurricane or tropical storm or superstorm Sandy. Sam and yeah, so that was 2012. So yeah, this is 12 years now. And with that I'm so happy that has provided me with the opportunity to get to know Brian. He's part of my Block Island family now. And I'm so grateful to have you here. I wish I could do just a download of all your geological knowledge right from your head into mine. It's like with a memory stick or something. Vulcan mind meld.
It's a very scary place.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to know all that stuff.
There's a lot of glitches and bugs.
I don't know. I don't want to know any of that stuff. I just want the geology because it's every time I speak with Brian, I learn something. So Brian, with that, I turn it over to you and have fun.
Thank you. I apologize in advance if you're coming to BIMI tonight. You'll see a lot of duplicate slides. It's August. I was not making two entirely separate talks.
No.
So you'll see some redundancy, but a little different spin on it tonight for BIMI. The title you came up with is Block Island Geology, Erosion, Storms, and Sea Level Rise. It's a pretty big list. Sea level rise we'll touch on, but we're going to focus a little more on the erosion, storms, shoreline change aspects of this. And while I'm the only name up there, obviously I don't do this work alone. I've had a whole cadre of students over the years work out here. Any of these kind of drone-based photos you see are taken by my colleague, Drew Hyatt. Some are drones, some are helicopter. We've been working out here for the last few years together. Drew is knee-deep in working on a book related to dinosaur footprints. That's not because he's a paleontologist. You think our work's esoteric, right? I mean, but he does photogrametric 3D modeling using images. So that's how he got involved in these dinosaur trackway publications. And it's been mired down. Actually, the publisher rejected it because it was too long. And now they're splitting it. Yale's publishing half and journal articles are going in the other half. So he's backlogged on catching up on Block Island geology data. So I don't have a lot of that data, but I do have pretty artsy pictures like this one for some stuff. Now, I'm going to try not to make this too much like school. If you know that movie, You and I Should Be Friends. It's a good classic from the 80s. But don't hesitate to ask questions, right? This is not a formal me talk for 30 minutes and then take questions. If you want to stop and talk about a slide, we can. If it's a real big tangent, I might ask to hold to the end, but we could try to make it a conversation as much as we can. So quick note on the geology of the island without getting into a ton of detail because this committee, and I don't know why my north arrow is covering that label, shame on me. But basically the island is two chunks of glacial end moraine, Beacon Hill Moraine to the south, Corn Neck to the north, connected by a series of barrier spits between those bluffs. And if we bring up an aerial image, right, that's probably what we're more used to seeing, right? Great Salt Pond in the middle, barrier spits on both sides, and then barriers scattered around other places on the island. Right. So examples of barriers besides obviously Crescent Beach and Great Salt Pond, the other side by Charleston Beach, Middle Pond, Saucon Pond, and a whole bunch of small little ones around the other coastal ponds. Some are kettles, some are barriers. There are differences there that we can get into later if we want. And then of course there's bluff shorelines as well. The bluffs on the island range is anybody who's walked the island from itty bitty, almost not even a bluff like Wash Pond, we'll see later, the landfill, or of course the Mohegan Bluffs. So I approach things with the Army method of giving talks. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to tell you. So if you fall asleep after this part. Just stay awake for the next 3 slides, then you can do it. Key messages. Storms are the most important driver in coastal change. We were in class right now, I pause and say full stop, underline that in your notes. On anything we really care about on a human timescale, storms really do drive the process. Sea level rise amplifies that effect over time and has other implications for low-lying coastal areas, particularly inland flooding or coastal flooding from sea level rise. But when we think about erosion, you need a process. You need waves, you need surge. Storms drive that. So the analogy I'll use probably more than once today is storms drive the bus, sea level rise inflates the tires on the bus a little more, makes the storm a little bit higher every year. And we'll talk about how much that is in a second. We're going to get into bluff erosion. We're going to think about how they erode, which is really actually a complex process, depending on where you are on the island. Balancing groundwater, surface water runoff, and wave action all contribute to eroding sediment from the. And I'll share the slides too, Judy, if you don't get all your notes. So the bluffs have retreated on average 20 to 30 meters over the century scale, and that's 1886 to 2018. Maximum was 75, and that's an average. We'll look at that spatially as well. I know a lot of it's in metric. I'll try to put English units if I remembered, 65 to 100 feet. But bluff erosion rates were higher between 2011 and 2018 than when we look at the whole of that century-long record. We'll talk about why. And then another thing to think about is that bluff erosion, well, it looks bad for the bluffs, is a key part of what we call the coastal sediment budget. So we'll touch on that as well. And then last one, and then you can take a nap. Beaches are dynamic. We'll talk about the response and a little bit on how we know that. I'll give more detail on the profiling tonight. Dunes recover slowly. West Beach continues to erode. No surprise there. And then we'll close with a couple thoughts on the shoreline impacts don't get better with rising sea level and maybe more frequent, more intense storms, although that science is a little less settled. All right, so let's get into it. Now, I know there's a huge elephant in the room when I talk about any of this stuff, right? And that is sea level, right? Obviously, sea level is rising. We'll talk about how much, and that does have huge implications, a lot of which you guys are wrestling with as a committee, particularly flooding, whether it's Bridgegate Square or around the Bimini parking lot, right? I've got one of your videos for tonight for that talk, Judy, during the storms. We're really going to focus on the storm and erosion side of it, but it's worth acknowledging that sea level is going up, indisputable. We can argue why, you want to take different positions on that, but we measured that multiple ways and it's rising. To me, the best summary right now comes out of NOAA. About every 4 or 5 years, lead author is a guy named Bill Sweet. They publish a summary of sea level rise projections by region for the country. And in the past, they went out to 2100. The most recent version in 2022, they said, yeah, we're going to stop at 2050. The reason they stopped at 2050 is we don't understand enough about the dynamics of the big ice sheets on the planet and what that means for the second half of the century. There's others that will make projections. IPCC goes out a century or two. But NOAA's focusing on the next 30 years, partly because that's a good planning horizon. And it's also where the curves, whether you're looking at present trajectory or higher, still kind of close together. So if we plan for present trajectory and you're not off by a meter, you're off by 10 centimeters, if that's the line we follow. So I think this has been a reasonably conservative approach, and they acknowledge in the report, they'll keep revisiting that as they get better and better science on the ice sheets. But the present right now means that by 2050, we're looking somewhere between 40 to maybe as much as 50 in the upper bounds of the uncertainty, 60 centimeters. That's 2 feet higher sea level than we had in the year 2000. That's where they start zero on that. Yeah, 2000 on this graph. So it's going up. That's roughly where we're looking right now. Could it be 6 feet or something crazy by the end of the century? Sure, but we're not there with understanding the ice sheets yet. You want to hear all the worst case stuff, read Jeff Goodall's books. He's got a couple good ones that really go into that. Okay. Present rates of sea level rise, it's a little tricky to figure that out. Right? The NOAA tide gauge runs regressions through their data. Newport's comes in at just under 3 millimeters per year. That's 1 centimeter every 3 years. But some other folks have done analysis on different segments of the data and would put a slightly higher rate in the more recent decades. It's a little tricky because I think my mouth shows up kind of. If you look at, there's some areas, some years where sea level's a little lower, driven by broad regional wind and weather trends. Some years where it's a little higher, including El Nino years like we just had. So it's a little bit of a game of when you pick your regression line, you can always make it look a lot steeper. But I think reasonable numbers are probably in the 3 to 4 millimeters a year range right now. Now, again, why do we think about storms? The two blue lines there are your normal tidal datums in feet on tide staff. I stole that figure from John Boothroyd a long time ago and still use it. That's Sandy, and that's the 1938 hurricane. So yes, sea level rise matters. But if the 1938 hurricane happens again in some decade from now, it'll be a little bit higher than it was if it had happened this year. But we're talking 9.5 feet or 9.6 feet. There's a difference there, but not a whole lot of big impact change in the short time periods. So we're going to look at storms, and we're going to look at erosion being driven mostly by storms, like Sandy. Now, Sandy was a unique one. Superstorm Sandy is kind of its moniker. Made landfall as a Category 1 hurricane just before landfall in New Jersey. It merged with a massive cold front and became this huge, gigantic weather system. Right, coastal impacts in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, all the way down to North Carolina. Snow in the Appalachians, all from the same weather system. And because of that size, it had this immense amount of power and fetch to it. So we saw fairly high storm surge, right, 4.5 feet above high tide, and wave heights measured at the buoy at 31 feet. I think speculative off of that, you could have seen another, 40 or 50 foot wave on out there occasionally. So if you were out here, that caused damage to the island, to the infrastructure. Horn Neck Road took a big hit. It's not the first time, obviously not the last time that's going to happen. And you see the damage after the storm. I happened to be out here for a mistimed surf casting trip the following weekend. And we drank a lot of bourbon and didn't catch a lot of fish. And the storms cause erosion of the natural environment as well. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the detail of this figure, other than it's a cross section of a bluff pulled a long time ago now by Amber McDonald, who was a former student up by Clayhead somewhere, where we pulled cross sections from LiDAR. And what you'll notice is the pre-Sandy is in red, post-Sandy is in yellow, and then the bluff retreats back when we get to the 2014 data. One of the tricky things in studying bluff erosion is it doesn't necessarily happen immediately during the storm. In this case, if the bluff gets undercut, it's going to take some time for the rest of it to kind of catch up to that process. So it's not always, we went out the day after the storm and look, the bluff crest didn't move. But it might be a year or two later where it kind of readjusts for that. The other thing storms do is cause overwash. And so on those barrier shorelines, Crescent Beach, again, Charleston Beach, Saucon Pond, Middle Pond, take your pick. And washover fans and overwash is actually a really important part of the coastal system. Because what that process does is allow the barriers to migrate. And barrier spits are mobile landforms, right? They're actually fairly geologically young. They're built and formed out of the glacial deposits themselves that get eroded and reworked. So they're geologically only, in most cases, a few thousand years old. And they survive and respond to storms by doing what's called overwashing. So water in surge gets up high, it overtops the landform, the dune, the driveway, whatever's there, and sediments picked up from the front and deposited in the back. What we call a washover fan. In fact, that's why these barriers have this really wide, flat area on the back. Call it the back barrier flat. All this area back here is where, can I do a laser pointer on this? I think I can. I used to go. Yeah, there we go. There we go. So over here on this back barrier, there's a lag, so bear with me as I'm trying to talk and do this at the same time. That's all storm surge deposit from previous storms in the past. Then the dune recovers and the barrier kind of looks the way it's supposed to, as we tend to think it is. This is a really important part of their survival and their resilience. It's kind of allowing them to do this. I joke in class all the time that if barriers went to yoga, their mantra would be landward and up. They're always trying to move landward and up. They build back, build themselves up. So what does that look like? Well, this is a textbook washover fan from Bean Point, taken from a helicopter in August of 2013. So Bean Point here, New Harbor Inlet over here. Now, if you're a salt marsh ecologist, you're having nightmares about this, but that's your future salt marsh in a couple decades, so that's okay. And we can look at this at other spots as well. Now, Middle Pond saw a little bit of overwash and sandy, but all of this is actually related largely to the 30th hurricane, where we saw overwash and inlets breaching during that storm. Middle Pond was actually open for a little while. Interesting. But at Bean, we actually have pretty good data on this because we have ortho photos or aerial images taken before and after the storm, as well as what we call LiDAR data, which is elevation data flown from a helicopter, shot with laser beams, and produces a really accurate model of the landscape. So I've highlighted the shoreline here on this June pre-Sandy. This is post-Irene, so this little bit of sand here is Irene's washover. But that's the shoreline in June of 2012. And this is the exact same space. Don't think I'm not lying to you here. This is after in August of 2014. I'll go back. And now where's all the sand that was on the beach and the dune? Hey, it's on the back here on the back barrier. That's down by Bean Point, south. Yep, down towards West Beach. Yep.
Yeah, it's south of West.
Yes, down by Old Side. Yep, yep,
Absolutely,
Yep.
yeah.
yep. And so this is a washover fan, right? Textbook, perfect washover fan. We call them fans because they get this rounded shape to them. Right? We can measure that with LiDAR. Red here is erosion, including the little, it's not a dune ridge there. I hate the term ridge in coastal geology. Everything's called a ridge, right? Ridge and runnel, dune ridge, whatever. But there's a beach ridge there made out of largely cobbles that gets pushed up like a big storm berm. That got pushed back, and that's what all that green is. And we tested the LiDAR with some coring with some students, and all this works. Just don't go down there in June again, because the seagulls are really vicious in that area. The gulls. Peter Payton would tell me there's no seagulls.
There's no such thing as a seagull.
Okay.
We're-
So
yeah.
let's switch over to bluffs for a minute, and let's remind ourselves if barriers want to migrate and overwash, bluffs are a little different process. Really low bluffs can overwash, but anything high enough that isn't getting overtopped is largely a kind of a one-way ticket where the bluff's trying to erode backwards over time. And depending on where you are in the world, your bluffs are going to plot somewhere in this diagram of where the process is most important. And it's going to vary even around the island, which one is which, right? If you're way up in Penobscot Bay, Maine, right, surface water, groundwater, and even ice is going to be important. But because it's a sheltered bay, waves are going to be less important. You're on an exposed high energy shoreline, waves are going to be important, maybe more so than surface water and groundwater. Because of the, and I'm not going to plot like data on this and show you this. This is very conceptual, right, on this figure. But that means we need to think about these three different processes when we look at how the bluffs change. And the result is the same regardless of the process, right? When we think about erosion, we really just mean removal of sediment from where it was, putting it somewhere else. And all three of these take sediment from the bluff and put it on the beach. Once it's on the beach, then it can go somewhere else. So wave undercutting, that's Sam Boyle, my former student for Scale on Southwest, down somewhere south of this point. Wave undercutting, kind of a classic response of this lower bluff. Here, surface water, groundwater, probably not big drivers of change. Wave erosion certainly was after Sandy. Groundwater, I'll talk about in a second, and surface water all work to bring sediment down from the bluff, not necessarily during the same events that have big waves, right? That can happen during spring rain, it can happen during winter snow melt, or some combination, thunderstorm tonight, if we get one, is going to mobilize some sediment. Some of the sediment sinks or infiltrates into the ground, and if it hits a layer it can't go across. Oh, sorry, I thought I had a figure on that. I don't. If we have time later, I'll pull it up. And where that water doesn't continue down into the bluff, it'll move laterally and then pop out on the bluff face, this little red laser over here. And that also works to remove sediment, and it can increase instability on the top part of the bluff as well. So there's a lot going on when we think about it.
Brian,
And, yeah,
Brian, basic question.
sure.
Why are there no dunes protecting the bluffs?
Why are there no dunes? Mostly probably the reflective nature of the shoreline. Waves are going to bounce off the bluffs, and most of them are pretty coarse grained, so there's not a ton of big sand in front of it. Right? A lot of
okay.
gravel, a lot of boulders, and a lot of mud, which when it erodes go somewhere else.
Gotcha.
We'll talk about that idea in a second, not the dunes, but the where it goes in a second. It's a good question. You do find some shorelines where there's a ton of sand where you will have other coastal features in front of the bluffs, but usually not. Usually you just find them like this. So that means when we start to think about how these bluffs change, and again, this is one of Drew Hyatt's models. I think this is built from, this is drones from January of, I think January of this year. I don't think it's January of 23. And the figure up here is from Emily Himmelstoss's master's thesis working on Boston Harbor Islands, where you've got surface water, what we call rills and gullies, these little notches here. That's where the water collects. It's kind of like little mini watersheds. You drive around and you see you're in a catchment basin. Basically just means the water's funneling to one location. Some of these get pretty big. You see some pretty large ones collecting over here. And then you can also, it's hard to see, but there's some steeper faces down here. And that's the wave erosion where it's cut, it's going to notch into the toe of the bluff. So the cumulative result is the sediment comes off of the bluff face and gets down to the beach. Different layers, different stratigraphies behave differently. And that's some of the stuff Drew and I are trying to work out, but it's a little stalled right now on that. And that, of course, has produced some recent slopes, right? So if you're around the island in the spring, late May or early June, there were a couple of slumps on the south side of the island. This one Drew shot here, early June, and then another one over here. You'll notice both of them are in the grayer sediment. It's fairly fine-grained glacial lake floor material mostly. Yeah, well, that's, sorry. Yeah, I won't comment on that, but sure. I'm sure that hopefully they're aware of it. It's not surprising. This was the wettest spring, I think, on record in Rhode Island as far as rain in April, May, and June. Groundwater tables would have been high, a lot of precipitation. We had winter storms this past year that eroded the toe of the bluff. All of that triggers instability. I'm not shocked. We saw some slumps, and honestly, I'm surprised there weren't some other ones out here. But these were decent size. It got some social media attention. That's why we tried to make sure we got photos of them when we were out here.
Brian, can you leave that picture up?
Yeah.
So this is the perfect time for me to ask the question that, or to inform you, first of all, that about 2 or 3 homeowners have tried to use coir logs to remedy this situation. And somewhere in a document that I have, you stated that coir logs were not intended for these steep slopes. Can you elaborate?
The steepness is, maybe if I said that, I mean, they're not going to go vertical, but you can lay them on a 30 or 40 degree slope. They're not made for high energy environments. They're not made for breaking waves. So yeah, I mean, we could talk more about that at the end. I don't have a lot of faith in them stopping wave action. So yeah, I don't have a lot of faith in that.
Thank
They
you.
also degrade pretty quickly. So if the vegetation doesn't establish, coir logs last 3 to 5 years on average in salty environments. So they don't last that long either. So I don't get too worked up about them. I don't think they're going to do a whole lot either.
But it's an important question for the planning board.
Yeah, and we could talk more about it at the end if there's time. I got some figures on that from other places too. So we've seen them elsewhere. So, all right. So how do we measure this stuff? And again, I'm going to apologize for this metric. We're not going to measure a doggy-sized pothole or an asteroid the size of 33 armadillos. That's what I found on the web. I thought that was funny. I should have a picture in here, but I didn't, of Jimmy from Painted Rock. Anybody?
Yeah,
knows?
Jimmy, yeah, we all know Jimmy.
Okay, so Jimmy was my field assistant in June. He followed me around for about 3 hours. I got a nice selfie with Jimmy. We could measure, I guess, a Jimmy size. All right. So when we measure this stuff, we're largely using 2 data sets. I don't use a ton of aerial imagery for historic bluff position. And the reason I don't is it's hard to see the edge of the bluff when the vegetation's dense and get an accurate line. And it's also hard to geo-reference the old, particularly the 1939 photographs, because a lot's changed on the island since then. Fortunately, in 1886, the National Ocean Service, the predecessor, I guess, of NOAA in this case, or CGS, Coast and Geodetic Survey, whoever did it, did this fantastic 1886 NOAA topographic sheet, what we call a T-sheet. If you're local, you may know it as the Stonewall map, because they mapped every stone wall on the island at the time and the bluff crest and the shoreline position. Using the stone walls we're actually able to geo-reference that, get it into real space, so we can overlay it on modern coordinates and use that to measure where the bluff was in 1886, and that's that red line over here. We then compare it to what we call LiDAR. Again, that's the laser topography, and we draw the same feature. We use both the elevation and the slope, which is this red-green funny-looking map. That's actually the slope that's calculated by the software. It's all done in GIS and in black box Voodoo software. I just use the data to then interpret. And if we end up with those two lines, right, we can then measure the distance between them and see how much it's changed between 1886 and 2018. So it's actually a fairly simple calculation. The time is drawing the line. The software then spits out the data from all those measurements in a couple of minutes after that. The time really isn't interpreting the landform and drawing that line carefully. A very similar approach was done with the shoreline change mapping. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the shoreline change maps. They're out there. We talked about them a lot last year, I think. These are based on aerial photographs. And instead of the bluff crest, we measured the high tide line. These are regulatory documents. They are on the CRMC website. You can download them. There's also a viewer through the Beach SAMP website. So you can play around and get as granular as you want, looking at your favorite part of the island and how much it's changed. This is obviously Old Harbor, surf going up through like the beachhead area. Not actually super high rates of change along much of the east side, particularly here, 0.4, 0.6 feet per year on average. Except for down here, this is interesting. I suspect this little wedge here, that one of the years they dredged Old Harbor in the late 40s or early 50s, they decided to put the sand here and did not stay very long. But they looks like they tried that one. So let's talk about the bluff erosion, and okay, nobody can read that. Let's look at it spatially. If we take our averages around the island, and I've broken the island up into 4 spots here, kind of northeast, Grove to Mansion, Old Harbor to southeast, southeast to Schooner, and Grace to Schooner. It's about the same everywhere except for the southeast corner, and I think that's a trick of the geomorphology. There's a lot of shallow gravel boulder terraces on that shoreline, and I think that dissipates some of the wave energy before it gets to the bluff. That doesn't mean you don't have slumps and things happen there, but it's outside of our uncertainty. That's a different rate or a different amount of change than the south side. The little number in parentheses is the shoreline change over the same time period, and they're fairly similar. There's some differences, but not a lot for me to think there's a huge difference between them. So it's on average 60 to 100 feet of retreat. The maximum we measured was between Barlow's and Spar Point on the south side, 75 meters, 240 feet or so of change. That's actually not where the big landslide happened in 2000. It's just to the west of that, but in the same area around Black Rock Road.
So that's about 4 feet a year?
On the maximum retreat, but on average, a little under a foot per year of the whole.
Oh, right. And we can't really look at it as a constant per year number because we have events
Yes.
that caused the slumps and the waves. And
Yep.
so, and there's a time lag, as you said, between events.
Hold that thought. We'll get
Okay,
to that.
good.
Yep. So the other thing we have is we have multiple years of LiDAR data. So we have 2011, 2012, 2014, 18, and now there's new 2022. We haven't done that one yet. I need to get a student on that project. I'm just not there yet. But we can compare the rate over time between the century scale, which I'm calling 1886 to 2018. It's 132 years, century scale, versus that 7 years. Now, we can't directly compare them because the time scales are so different. So we divide it by the number of years to do what's called annualizing. Yes, that's not really the way shoreline change happens, but it's a convenient way to compare the two. And that's what's plotted here. In red is the rate of change between 2011 and 2018 for the area on Clayhead. A little under a meter, half to a 3/4 meter per year, kind of on average here. And the blue line is the century
That's a
scale.
lot. What a difference.
Blue line is what,
The
right?
century scale, 1886 to 2018.
So we're seeing a lot more
Well,
change now.
So what happened between 2011 and 2018?
Hurricane Sandy.
Sandy. We're seeing the influence of the storm on the data there. So we see a similar trend in Georgia. I saw your hand. Let me do 2 slides and if you see all the question, we'll talk, we can ask. Similar pattern on the south side. What you'll see is gaps there. That's where the really deep vegetated gullies are because they respond a little differently. I've clipped them out of the data. They actually just get noisy and some of them show up as deposition, which we know isn't real. I also think the guys in 1886, and I'll be genders, I think they were probably mostly guys in 1886.
Yes.
I think some of the really deep gullies, they just couldn't either find a good edge or they kind of gave up because vegetation was thick because the lines are a little wonky in some of those spots. But we see a similar pattern on the south side and west side of the island as well. So yes, we see a different rate of change. And there's numbers up here that I don't want to belittle too much. The maximum rate we saw in 2011 to 2018 was 3 meters a year. To me, the difference is 40% of the transects moved by more than 1.5 feet. Only 5% moved by more than 1.5 feet per year in the longer data term.
Okay.
I like thinking about it this way. On average, 13% of the retreat occurred in 5% of the time.
Ah.
So that's to me a way of thinking about, we had a chunk of it happen in 5% of the whole time I have data. So why? Well, what Judy said, this is not a linear process. Right? We like to think of things being linear, but it's not. And so this is a figure I modified. Sinamara 83 is kind of a classic bluff erosion or cliff erosion paper that if we've got bluff retreat on the y-axis going up and we've got time on the x-axis on the bottom axis, we see big flat periods where not much changes in the position of the bluff crest. Then we see events, whether it's a big wave storm, a rainstorm, some combination of the two, where we see the bluff jump back pretty quickly. Now that jump back might take several years as things kind of adjust after storms like Sandy, right? So when we annualize it, we're seeing different slopes on the line, right? Because we're looking at different pieces of it, right? So I wouldn't go out on a limb here and say that we're seeing a higher rate because of sea level rise or anything else. We're seeing the influence of Sandy on that data.
Yeah.
Right. That's where I would look at it. So that's an important thing to remember. We're not, and any shoreline change, and we'll look at this on West Beach. It doesn't happen in, linear steps. It happens in leaps and jumps and storms. All right, I'm going to try to go quick because I'm going longer than I planned, but it's been good discussion. Bluff erosion itself, well, it looks bad for the bluffs. If you're that property owner, you're probably a little concerned, but it's a key part of the coastal sediment budget. If you think about the coastal sediment budget like your checking account, the money coming in is your paycheck. That's the sand coming into your system. And the debits is what you let out of your system, whether that's into an inlet, offshore, or longshore out of your system. Right? If you're on the west side of the island, it's going up past Sandy Point off the north end of the island. Right? So when we see these events like this where the bluff retreats, this was the lighthouse in 2019 where it was almost 25 meters of slumpage. That's the rock that marks where the lighthouse has to be. They did a pretty good job moving the lighthouse, even though 30 years later it's a slump. That would have been bad if the lighthouse was still right there. But when we see this, which is basically blocking the lateral access at high tide and all of this sediment in the surf zone, right? That sediment going into the coastal system. Now, if it's mud, it goes somewhere else. If it's sand and gravel, it's probably staying on the beach. And gravel means everything from pebbles to boulders the size of this room.
Makes sense.
And we can calculate that, right? At least estimate it. So if you think about how much sand is added to the beach, it has to do with how much the bluff steps back, how big the bluff is, and how much of it is sediment that would stay on the beach, what we call beach compatible. So for instance would be, and I tried to do this in feet, in English units, if the bluff retreats at 1 foot per year on average, and the property or the section of bluff is 30 feet high and 200 feet long, and half of it is sand and gravel, that would be about 110 cubic yards of sediment per year on the beach. That's 5 18-wheel dump trucks, big dump trucks, 10 small dump trucks, right? Somewhere around there. Look at you know the yardage.
Nice.
Nine for a small one, right? So 10, 11 decent sized dump trucks of sand.
I mean, just how does that compare with an old farm with dredging?
Oh,
What do
well,
you think?
that's orders of magnitude more. They're dredging what, 10,000 yards?
I-
10 or 20 out of New Harbor.
Mike knows.
Yeah. What's,
Mhm.
something like that. It's on the order of, when they do New Harbor.
Put you on the spot there, Mike Shea.
It's on the order of 20,000, something like that.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Wow.
a big. But this
I
gets,
mean, I was trying to get a sense of, when we do the dredging, obviously that is sand that has to go somewhere.
yes,
And the question is it significant relative to what's coming off the ground anyway?
so if we did, I haven't done a count, it's a good question. There is a cumulative effect of this, right? This is for 200 feet of property. We'd have to look at the whole length of the block to figure that out. It's an answerable question, just not. But we can do that. Okay. So let's close with a look at Block Island beaches, right? My 3 bullet points I said to remember before you went to sleep. Beaches are dynamic. Dunes recover slowly. West Beach continues to erode. Now, most of what we know about this is from the Block Island Beach Profile crew. We don't have a good acronym, the BIBPC. Judy said it already, but Judy, Nigel, Kathy, and Jules, and then George, the new kid, came on in the last 5 years or so. And the original, the real OG is Dave Vanko, who's in the back, who started a profile on Mansion Beach in 2007 and found out about our program and was very kind to give us his location and old data. And so we end up monitoring 7 sites kind of regularly. There's 2 at Mansion, but we'll lump it in as 1 here, 3 on the east, 4 on the west, and then Old Cut when Nigel and Kathy feel like walking down. So usually to check on the birds to measure a profile down there. So kind of biannual-ish on that one. But this gives us a nice, fairly long record now of how the beaches respond to storms, but also the longer term trend on these shorelines, right? And so what this gives us is, yeah. Partly because there was no more sand in front of the riprap at the time, and trying to dodge traffic to measure the profile in June across the road was hazardous to their health.
On the interior side of that river pond.
Yep,
That's actually really.
Up
away.
on the inside from it's cut banking from the tidal currents. Yeah, interesting. So we wouldn't have measured that anyways. We started from a telephone pole and went across the street. But interesting. What this gives us is basically what we call a cross section, but you can think of it as a graph of elevation and distance. So we start at the same position every time, and I'll talk more about the method tonight if you come to Bimmy. And I like this figure. This is Dave's, I think one of your original profiles are close to it in August of 2007. Might have been the maximum volume. It might be why I use this one.
Mansion Beach.
This is Mansion Beach. And what you'll notice is this is the dune and the beach in 2007. In yellow is June of 2024. I don't remember who's on the East Beaches right now, but whoever just did it in June. And the red is 2013, which is our first profiles, the first profile after Sandy, I think. And this is the scarp. This is where the dune was eroded in Sandy. Mansion hasn't changed a whole lot since Sandy. We've seen some recovery of the dune, right? But it's not anywhere near where it was in 2007. And so this is actually net retreat of the shoreline, right? If we look at whatever contour line we pick, the shoreline's gone back 5 meters or so, give or take, between 2007 and 2024. Yeah.
I thought it might be worthwhile saying that the x-axis.
You want to come up
is
to
a
the-
lot.
Yeah, so
to the
it's a
y-axis.
fair enough. It's a 5-to-1 vertical exaggeration. So each box is 5 meters or 15 feet by 3 feet. Yes, we do that because if you plotted these at 1-to-1, they'd be long and you wouldn't see any vertical stuff. Good point, Nigel. Thank you. So when you see that, you're looking at, a change in the dune and a net retreat of the shoreline at that site. And that's the only way we get that kind of data is by going out and measuring. Yes, Judy.
So I would argue that Mansion Beach isn't really a dune. It's sort of a hybrid between a dune and a bluff.
It's what we call a welded barrier. It was a barrier. It's migrated back. It
Yeah.
Still has the morphology of a barrier, but it's not a barrier.
Yeah,
It still has a dune ridge, still has a dune crest.
it does have a dune on top, but yeah,
It's
it's
still a
okay.
dune. It's still formed by aeolian processes that makes it a.
I just didn't have as much hope for that as I did for the one, for,
Like Crescent?
yeah, there you go.
Okay, so this is Crescent, and I'll hit play on this twice because this is cool. This is a year in the life of Crescent Beach when we were measuring monthly profiles. And you'll notice it starts, I'll let it stop and then I'll get it.
It's getting fatter.
Now, the reason I don't do this every year is a pain in the ass to make this plot. So I use this one because I like it. You'll see the dune changes slowly, but you'll notice the beach part, which is kind of our towel space down here, changes a lot from one. Because the beach actually responds to small storms and big storms, right? And you see this general pattern of, I'll have it one more time, a fairly flat featureless beach in the winter, mostly in response to east winds, nor'easters and sou'easters, and what we call a big fat happy berm in the summer, where the beach is a little higher, sometimes even slopes back towards the dune, like you see right there, and it's a little bit higher and a little bit narrower. And that's, again, we can only get this data by going out and measuring it. And all of this is part of the Annette Grilli project. I'm on that as well, and we use this data to help calibrate and tune their model approach. Out of that, we can also extract volumes. This is the whole volume of the profile, so it includes the dune and the beach. On the east side, we see Mansion kind of slight down, Scotch Beach kind of holding about the same, and Crescent Beach has this big upward slope on it. And when we look at the west side, we see, I'll come back to the east side in a second, a big down slope on Wash Pond, particularly given that there's not that much sediment there to begin with. And these are all plotted, these two on the same axis, these two are not because the volumes are so different. Charleston Beach is actually going up at our profile location, and Cooney Miss is a slight down, but not a huge down. So that leads you to this other point of dunes recover slowly. And when I plot our first profile and our most recent, or close to our most recent profile of Crescent Beach,
Yeah.
you'll notice the dune at Crescent Beach is huge. We've had to move our backstake up twice
Yep.
because it kept getting buried or almost getting buried. And we saw a lot of recovery there. It's close to the opening where the cabana is. I think that influences it. But it's also at a nice spot where it gets sand from multiple directions of wind. And so the dunes there are pretty robust. Right? At Scotch Beach, we see dune recovery. It's a little smaller, and these are both at the same exaggeration. So again, 15 feet by 3 feet on the boxes. They're little rectangles, even though they look like squares. Right? But you can really see the change over the decadal scale here, right, when you look at how the dunes recover. So that caveat at the top is important. Dunes recover slowly, right? When we talk about a storm like Sandy, you're looking at generally a decade or close to a decade to get your dunes back to where they were. Similar numbers where I work at Napatree Point as well. It's a decade to get back to kind of where you are, right? So we can get data out of that and plot it and get a number of how long it takes these dunes to come back after the storms. The beach part comes back fast. That's why this data is so noisy, right? We see the dune staying the same or most of the same, but the beach is changing month to month, survey to survey. That's why the data is so noisy there. But the dunes recover at a slower, kind of steadier pace. I figured people want to know the most recent storms. December, January, we had 3 back-to-back-to-back storms. There was a lot of inundation. There was a lot of bark to these storms, but not a lot of bite on at least the east-facing beaches. There was a lot of southerly wind, and I think that actually kept the impacts from not being too bad on the profiles. A little bit of erosion here at the dune toe at Mansion, the berm here, but that comes back in a week or two. So really not a huge impact at any of the 3 eastern profiles from those storms. Lots of flooding in town, lots of inundation, right? But not a ton of bark, not a ton of bite on those storms. But when I'm going to flip those slides for tonight. That should have been the other order. When we look at the dune volumes, instead of being noisy like the beach volumes, it's a pretty steady increase. And if I run a regression line through those, you can figure out how much sand per year is added to those dunes. So again, we talk about them being slow for a reason. Scotch Beach adds 1.8 cubic meters per year. It's about 2. Crescent Beach is high around 5. That's still only half of a dump truck at Crescent Beach a year, and a quarter, a third of one, not even a fifth of one at Scotch over the course of a year. over 1 year. That's per meter, per 1 meter of shoreline, per 3 feet of shoreline, yeah. The reason the reason the units look funny, it's meters cubed per meter, it's for every 1 meter of beach we measure a volume. No, this is just taking a cut of the dunes above a certain elevation for instance. So it's not, it's. The whole west side keeps going in. So this is specific to Crescent and Scotch Beach.
Yeah, the dune, yes,
Yes, it goes all the way across the.
yes, it starts at the telephone pole across the street.
Yeah, it's got all that, that's all. Yes, yep.
Yeah, the reference is the telephone pole across the street.
So. The last 2 points, and then I know we're getting on in time. West Beach continues to erode. We look at the shoreline change maps for West Beach, right? That's the landfill down here. 1.5, 3 feet per year, kind of on average, depending on where you look on that shoreline. Now the landfill, if you're not familiar with the island, that's what it looked like after Sandy. Big scarp of eroding trash and Amber McDonald for scale. In 2018, the town put in a tow protection, small revetment, rated the landfill back. March 24, I'm not going to comment on it, but that's what it looked like in March. I assume it looks about the same in July, or what are we in August now? But I didn't go look at it today.
Brian,
Yeah,
just a quick one. Will whatever engineers we hire, in this case for the Corneck Road project, will they be presented with this
Sure.
information?
we can meet with them. I know people at all three of those firms, so whoever you end up with, sure, we can have a meeting.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I want to highlight real quick Wash Pond, which is the profile up there. Now, Wash Pond was strategically located in the area of the highest rate of shoreline change on the island, about 1 meter per year on average over the last 60 years or so. And our profile there, we very serendipitously moved to the backstake back in January, early January this year. This is one of our first profiles in 2013 in red. And that's what happened between 2013 and January 3rd of 2024. That is what happened just in 2 storms in January of 2024, right? Where we see again, this, to me, this is a really nice way of emphasizing this stuff doesn't happen in linear steps. It happens in jumps, right? Nothing happens for a while, then a big storm. Nothing happens in a while, another storm. And so we certainly saw that shoreline take a jump back in those 2 storms this winter. And if we switch to this view, this is just showing us what's changed in the last 11 years. Why I like this is that's 13 meters of shoreline retreat in 11 years. Hey, that's about the same as we measure here, about 1 meter per year.
Mhm.
As a scientist, when my 2 different data sets come together independently like that, makes me very happy. Right. And if you want to see what it looked like, that's before and after. That's the signpost in the red arrow that we used to use for our starting point. We almost lost that in the storm, and now we have a new starting point. We moved back behind that. This is a very low bluff. This is glacial sediment. Some of it's some salt marsh peat on top or in some spots, but this is mostly just a very, very low bluff with a little bit of overwash, not even quite dune stuff on top, but pretty much it's just a very low bluff with lots of cobble and lots of bluff. All right, so my concluding thoughts. 1, shoreline impacts don't get better with rising sea level. I pulled this quote, it's long, but you can get the gist of it quick, from a USGS working group back in 2007, led by Ben Gutierrez. That basically their takeaway is it's virtually certain headlands will be subject to increased erosion under any of the sea level rise scenarios they considered, and very likely that shoreline and what they call upland, meaning bluff erosion, will accelerate in responses to increases in sea level. So whatever happens with sea level, to varying degrees, it doesn't get better. And on the barriers, I pulled this quote from Mariotti and Hine. Chris Hine, for my money, say young scientist, he's my age, but one of the best younger, I'm not that young anymore, coastal scientists kind of in the game right now. He's down at Virginia Institute of Marine Science. So I give his work a lot of credence. But I like this quote from this paper that even if sea level remains at present rates, barrier retreat in response to sea level rise will accelerate 50% within a century. Obviously, it gets worse if rates go up. That was heartening to me because about a decade ago in the beach sand process, we came up with this idea of a multiplier. It's not binding, but if you go to do a permit with CRMC now, you have to fill out this coastal hazard application worksheet. It's really designed to make homeowners aware of risk. It's not binding. It doesn't mean you can't buy the property or do something with it, but it's making sure you're acknowledging the risk of sea level rise and erosion. And we came up with a multiplier based on some science at the time that we would produce a doubled rate of shoreline change by 2100, assuming sea level rise really accelerated. So it makes me feel better that Chris and his colleagues are coming up with reasonably similar values in their work. And with that, I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. Thank you, by the way, yes. Thank you. Can you get up and go to the microphone? Thanks. I don't care which one. Because we are on YouTube, we are being recorded.
Chris Warfel, Block Island. I know it's essential to understand the mechanisms that are causing the erosion. I'm interested if you know of, or if this committee knows of work being done to, I know you're not going to stop it, but to slow down the erosion. What geotechnical engineering techniques are being used? You had mentioned, I'll say, rock and sand as being more or less resident after an erosion event. Are there mechanisms to try and, keep that close to the shore and use it as a way to help rebuild the shoreline with other techniques? Because I don't see too much being done as how to control this or slow it down. So I'm wondering in your work, if you come across people that are working on that. Thank you.
I mean, there's certainly work being done. That's a good question, Chris. Thank you. Part of the project that Annette Grilly is leading on is to look at some of those possible solutions in what we call model space. So come up with a process-based model to then try to simulate the effect of some of these things, whether it's beach replenishment or nature-based solutions, or maybe the sand engine is an interesting idea, or the offshore breakwaters have been proposed. I get leery of really permanent stuff. Right? So anything like an offshore breakwater, which would be a series of small shore parallel, small being relative, right? Let's say 100 meters long with gaps in between them. I get leery of the unintended consequences of stuff like that, particularly edge effects. Wherever you stop, you're going to have increased erosion. You're going to change sediment balances around. So I get leery of really permanent stuff. I mean, you get a good sense of what shoreline protection or what structures do is by looking at New Harbor. I pulled back up the map, right? If you were to, let me see if I can zoom in on that. And put in, oh, wrong side, sorry. There we go. Zoom. We were to look at New Harbor Inlet. I'm going to try to switch back. I can't do laser pointer on here, but everything from about the Coast Guard station out was not there until they built that jetty. Right, this whole triangle of sand showed up after they built the jetty, right, which interrupts longshore sediment transport. So sediment right now comes off of Braces and Dories, probably about as far as Southwest Point, and comes north with longshore transport. It's filled the whole jetty up now, so sand can't really go. There's no more deposition happening here. It now comes around, gets in the channel, gets dredged by the Corps, gets taken somewhere else. That's led to, I think that's what's exacerbated the issues on West Beach is it's a sediment supply issue. And that's really why you see higher rates of change in and around this, particularly this middle stretch of the west side. So I get leery of stuff like that causing issues on the west side. Could softer solutions work as short-term things, whether that's replenishment or something? Maybe, but this is the east side in particular is a damn high energy shoreline. Design stone size for a revetment is 22 tons on the shoreline. That's a 7 cubic meter granite boulder. I took a class out for a field trip to try to find it. We were at a site on the mainland to try to find a natural boulder that big. When we finally measured one that was that big, my student blurted out, "That's a big leaping rock." So from then on, we've ever lovingly called them BFRs. So I get leery of that kind of stuff, partly because cost. I mean, Taylor Swift could afford it on her site, but I do get concerned with that kind of stuff.
I just want to follow up with that.
Yeah.
Using one monolithic object to
Yep.
dissipate energy. In my career and observation is not as good as using multiple smaller objects to deflect the wave energy path. And some of the things that I've seen indicates that is actually more successful. Again, I'm just looking for sources of information.
I mean,
Thank you.
yeah, no, it's an interesting question. The problem with smaller stuff is it becomes shrapnel and gets moved a lot. So if you use cobbles that are bowling ball sized, you know, it doesn't seem like it, but waves are gonna toss them around up onto the beach, so, and onto the roads and everything behind it. So I guess I have to think about whether I can think of a specific example. I can think of certainly some where they've tried to do bluff erosion mitigation, and I'm not meaning the coconut fiber stuff we just talked about. But there's a very famous one on Nantucket, right? Where down at Sconset, they've put in these very large geotubes. They're basically giant burritos, and they're not made of coconut fiber. They're made of a geotextile that doesn't degrade in 3 to 5 years like coconut fiber does. But this was an interesting project that they said a couple years ago they were going to stop doing. Now, this was a private installation. The homeowners got together and paid for this. Mass CZM approved it. It is all private money, $3 million to install for 850 feet of beach. With, we can argue what kind of results they've had. They were talking about stopping that project a couple years ago. I'm trying to find my picture. I had it and one of the stipulations was they had to put sand on that beach every year. They had to put 19,000 cubic yards of sand added per year. That was done in the same way I showed you the calculation. They said that's the sand the beach is going to lose when you block off that bluff. So you've got to pay to put that much sand per year on. And to get sand out to the island is not easy. They have to barge it over from Plymouth. They bring it out to Nantucket. They offload it. They then bring it over and put it on this conveyor belt and shoot it off the bluff face. Now, normal beach replenishment is offshore, $20 a cubic meter to, I've seen Winthrop, Mass was like $50 a cubic meter. I don't want to know what they're spending on this, but it's a lot of money.
It has doubled to tripled in the last couple years and tanked the project and
So-
it's causing so much
but they
chaos
just-
in their Concom.
They said they were gonna tank it, but then as soon as they did that, the town got involved and they just brought sand out again in February. So it's the project that's never gonna go away. Is it gonna stop bluff erosion? They're probably not. Is it gonna buy the homeowners a little bit of time? Maybe, but it's probably not. For the reason I don't think it's gonna be successful is it's not stopping the other two factors. It's not dealing with surface water and groundwater. It's only trying to limit the wave erosion at the bottom. And it's a high energy shoreline like this. So on the really tall bluffs, I don't think there's a lot we can do that's scalable and cost effective that's not going to have really bad impacts. On the built environment, Old Harbors, I mean, listen, I'm a realist. You're going to have to engineer some areas, right? That's everywhere in every coastal town. I'm not a purist that we should just retreat, wash our hands and move back. Clearly, there's infrastructure we're going to have to protect, including Corn Neck Road. I just don't know what the answer is going to be on that, other than causeway. Right? But that may not be cost effective. So I think we're going to learn a lot with the Annette project. And I think when we have meetings out here, if there's particular ideas people want to try to test sand engine, we'll see what the model can do. I mean, my role in that is not the modeler. I'm the geologist. I try to keep them grounded in reality. And particularly matching the data. So we try to tune the models to observations from the profiles and LiDAR to make sure the model's doing a reasonable job of then playing around with these different scenarios.
And Annette Grilly is, I mean, I do send her questions like Socia sent her directly your question about the sand engine. And, but I think Chris sent me a question and I send those to Annette. So
Yeah.
that she knows that, because, you know, it's hard to capture them
Yep.
when we're all sitting in a room. What are your questions?
Yep.
You know, but when I get them, I send them to her.
And part of the reason I get leery of really permanent stuff is the paradigm is, to me, is you can protect a house or you can protect a beach. And it's very hard to do both, right? So if we put in a shore parallel structure in this cartoon as a seawall, the challenge is if there's a beach in front of it, eventually the beach is going to go away. Now, I'm not arguing it's going to accelerate it. That's a tricky question. There's both sides of the argument on that, whether they accelerate erosion in front of them or not. But either way, the process doesn't stop. The shoreline has been retreating for a century or more, geologically a lot longer than that. and we put a wall up, the beach in front's still going to go away, whether it accelerates or not. And you eventually lose that access and you lose that beach. It's one of the reasons that the dump, they put the path over the top, because they pretty quickly recognize the beach, the shoreline's gonna be up against that revetment in a lot of cases. So I guess that's where I get leery with it, but I fully recognize there's gonna be places we're gonna have to armor. And maybe it's gonna have to get done in conjunction with beach replenishment.
Can I go to Lisa?
Of course.
We can use the mic, please. That's because I know I'm gonna get the question from Sosha anyway.
Right.
Brian, this is a very unscientific study that I've been doing myself for several years now, but I walk the beach every morning at dawn with a friend and our dogs. And I've been photographing the same set of rocks at Scotch Beach every single day.
Yeah.
And I probably go 320 days out of the year at least anyway. So we call it Shark Rock. It's the three rocks that, so what we see there is, there are times when you have to reach way, way, way up. It's 8 or 9 feet tall, the big rock. And I have photographs of tire tracks going over it in August a few years ago. So that, the face of the beach there changes in a huge scope, but we see it as being cyclical, more.
To a fair extent, it's cyclical, but
Um,
it's really cyclical around storms, right? Those storms fair weather. So if we get a big storm in January, you're gonna see the profile look a different way. But if you get the same storm in September, it's gonna do the same thing.
Mm.
So it's cyclical in terms of when you've had storms or fair weather. Absolutely. And that's
But-
this slide of Crescent Beach, right? Similar story.
Mm.
You really see the dynamics of the beach. And so if you were a rock right here where my mouse is, yeah, right now you've got 3 feet of sand over you. Now you've got, you're exposed to the surface. So yeah, we see those kind of things. Absolutely. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
The dynamics of that
I
show.
mean, we're so goofy. We've named several of the rocks
that's
too,
all.
they're so. so,
Everybody
but-
knows Shark Rock.
Yeah.
But I think you're observing that
Yeah.
natural dynamic nature you get of it. I don't necessarily put times of year on it. We tend to see more storms in fall, winter, spring. So you could say winter, summer, but really it's storm and fair weather. It's the way to think
Mhm.
about that. But yeah,
Mhm.
there's certainly a pattern to that. for sure.
Also, what I notice when I walk on the beach is it's like all cobbles and then the next day it's all sand.
Mhm.
And then 2 days later,
There.
right, they just get covered or uncovered.
Absolutely. Good.
Martha, do you want to come up?
Sure.
Because probably 35 years ago, before we all had cameras in our pockets, I asked Les Serkin, probably familiar with his name,
I didn't know last.
about this whole thing with the sea rise, what happens with the beach moving up and down. And he said, pick a rock and follow it. And it was exactly the same thing that Lisa has been seeing. And it isn't storms. And my experience wasn't storms. It was gradual. It started out this high.
Yeah.
And then as the season went on, it became bigger and bigger and bigger, and then surrounded by rocks. And then the sand came back, and then the rock, it goes down. And I'm sure that was at Jerry's point, just at the very end of Mansion, which is probably, I don't know how far from Scotch that is. But I'm
Mile
sure
or two
they're
north.
all around the island. And I always thought, well, it doesn't, I always really was annoyed because I said, well, I mean, I got how to do this from a real person, a doctor, and everybody would say, well, that doesn't count because you didn't measure it. And people would come in May and October and measure the rocks. Well, they're going to be the same. You're missing the whole point of the seasonality of this.
Right.
Well, that's why we do the data all year round. Those are great observations.
Okay,
ahead.
my one and only question that's left, but it's my favorite one. I asked to you last time you were here, and I realized afterwards that I didn't word it correctly.
Okay.
So I'm trying to improve now. We're looking at protecting the dunes in order to protect Corneck Road.
Yes.
So to what extent do you feel we should be closing off gaps where people walk or gaps that allow cars to travel across? or gaps created by the beach pavilion, should we be looking at making the dune uniform and allow emergency vehicles to drive over on, those
Mhm.
planks? What's your opinion?
I mean, the danger of doing that is if you suddenly get a wall, you're not gonna get any of the overwash that the barriers actually need, right? The washover fans.
Mm-hmm.
I get less worked up about things like the path at Scotch, right? I know that's been a discussion point for a while out here. The beachhead is a different one because that is a very wide opening that has infrastructure right behind it. So I understand that's a real vulnerability. How to handle that one best for the emergency access, that's a response kind of question. Would the road fare better if there was a dune in front of that? Of course, right? You're not focusing the energy there, but just up the road from that, you have an entire section of Corn Neck Road that has nothing in front of it other than there's a little pile of sand right now. But in a big enough storm, that's not gonna matter, right? And the
Mhm.
road's gonna get trashed again. The pavilion's an interesting question. Yeah, that would be probably well served to have something in front of it. If you want to limit flooding on that parking lot in that section of road. But I would still keep it where it's a fairly natural dune where you're still allowing some overwash and washover fans to get across the barrier. I know that looks catastrophic, but that's what the shoreline needs.
And
Right? Even this with my sandy pictures, right? That's really what the shoreline's trying to do. So yeah, could the pavilion get moved back? Fantastic. Could you put a dune in front of it? Great. I think if you put a dune in front of it, it's gonna stick out and that's gonna have issues with wave focusing and might go away quickly. I don't know.
And so, but do you think it's okay for us to leave the footpaths that are now created
Yes.
by
Yeah, I
pedestrians?
know.
Okay.
There's reasons to close some of them. We did this at Napa Tree. There were 86 trails or something like that, informal trails. People would anchor their boat on one side and cross willy-nilly to the other side. And that was really done for ecological reasons to say, listen, let's focus the people onto 5 paths to limit the disturbance to the ecology. It wasn't done to limit the sand movement. In fact, the washover fans went across the paths this winter. That's what the shoreline's supposed to do. So, yeah, no, that to me that wouldn't faze me.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Executive privilege, one last question. One of the things that you and I have spoken about, Brian, and this is important for us in anticipating these storms in the future for our own edification. And that is that Sandy tracked west of us. So we were essentially in the right front quadrant of that storm, which means that the speed of the storm adds to the wind speed and adds to the storm surge, and it's the worst part of the storm. Our 2 January storms, I can't remember December, but both of our January storms, I think the lows tracked to the west of us.
They did.
And so that's why they weren't nor'easters.
No, they were sou'easters.
Yeah, and
Actually, the
that's
first one was dead southern.
dead southerly. And I had no idea with those southerly winds, how much damage would be done, how much change, I shouldn't say damage, how much change would be occurring on the west beaches.
Yeah, I think that's the waves refracting around. They
Right.
bend around the island.
Yeah.
From both the south and north. And that's what happened in Sandy, I'm pretty convinced.
Yeah.
That's not southwest swell coming in. It's the swell wraps, because it's so big, those storms, wraps all the way around Southwest Point and comes around that side.
Wow.
That's I wasn't here to watch it during Sandy, but that's my supposition. To move the sediment we saw north of Bean Point on this stuff, that washover fan, let me go to this one. There's cobbles in that. You need 2 meters a second of flow to move that. So that was some serious waves, coupled with surge going across that shore.
Wow.
Yeah, that happened again this.
Yeah, I'm not, doesn't shock me.
It's
There's,
wider.
yeah, and the beach ridge there is still relatively low. I have to profile it tonight's data.
So I'll tell you, I'm saying I'm going to pay a whole lot more attention now to the direction of the low pressure system, just like I do the center of the hurricane, and because that right front quadrant, even if it's a storm, a regular winter storm, or especially if it's coming up the coast, it's going to be.
Matters. So Boothroyd, Hayes and Boothroyd John Boothroyd is my PhD advisor now, passed away 8 or 9 years ago. Miles Hayes, who was basically the godfather of modern coastal geology, was Boothroyd's advisor. My colleague Illy likes to say we're all grandchildren of Hayes. But Boothroyd and Hayes had a paper in the sixties that came out, republished in the eighties. The 5 key factors for storm erosion. Storm track,
Yeah.
right? Tidal phase, that means is it high tide or low tide? And is it a spring tide or neap tide?
Yeah.
When was your most recent storm, right? And then storm intensity matters as well. But
Right.
really, when you think about it, it's storm track, storm intensity, and when was your last storm? Now, because the impacts weren't bad on the east side, they were certainly more on the west. It really is a cumulative effect in that case with 1, 2, 3 storms in 3 weeks. So certainly we saw that. And the mainland, there's some spots in the mainland that got hammered. Maine got trashed in some of their areas, Hampton Beach, that area of Maine. Because the second 2 storms, particularly the third one, was more of an east track for us, which meant east winds for them. With really, I mean, Portland set their water level record, I think, twice in 3 weeks. So, yeah, those are decent storms.
Thank you so much. I want to thank also our audience for being here today, and please come to Bimmy tonight because we'll see some of these, but
Some more stuff.
but there's more stuff.
I can talk more. If you believe it, I can
You
talk
can
more.
actually talk more. And I want to thank you all for coming today. We do try and make a our August meeting a little bit more entertaining for you guys. And so thank you, Brian.
You're
And let's
welcome.
give Brian another hand. Unless there's any other business, is there any other business? May I ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting? Sosha, and a second? Oh, George seconds. It. All in favor? And all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Yay, victory. Thank you. We'll see you all at 7 at Bimmy.